Hi, it's wonderful to be with all of you here today. As a futurist, I often get asked the question, what makes the AI revolution different from any other previous technological change that we've seen in the past? And to understand that, you've really got to think about the bigger context under which all of these changes are happening. A bit over 100 years ago, an extraordinary thing happened. The Spanish flu of 1918, like COVID-19 in 2020, happened alongside a whole bunch of other social, political, and economic changes, which unleashed forces of transformation we'd never seen before. In other words, mass manufacturing, the role of data in public health, new types of organization, electricity, computation. All of this came together to unleash a century's worth of change that would lead to not only the doubling of the human lifespan, but the rise of the modern economy. Once again, I believe that AI is more than just a new technological trend. It is, in a sense, a great equalizer, which has the potential to not only change industries and organizations, but the very fabric of how we work and, of course, why we work. So to get to the bottom of this, I've got three big questions to explore with you today. The first is, how's the world going to change by AI? Secondly, what's it going to do to the design of our organizations? And thirdly, what is it going to mean for us as leaders in this new century? So let's start at the beginning of the story, because I think it's worth remembering that in 2025, we have to think about how the world's going to change, not just by AI, but in particular by AI agents. A couple of years ago, ChatGPT was the beginning of the generative AI revolution, but a lot's changed. In fact, this year at CES, Samsung are introducing a new kind of fridge which uses AI technologies to scan the food that you put inside it. It keeps track of it. It watches what you then take out. It can not only recommend recipes to you using generative AI tools, but it has an inbuilt AI agent that will reorder the things that are missing from your fridge with a partnership with Instacart. It's the kind of example in the span of just 2 years by which AI has embedded itself into the deep fabric of everyday life. It's hard to imagine a world without AI now, but we're still at the beginning of the story. To understand why AI agents are so different from the early generative AI tools that we had in 2022, think about it from the perspective of the people who I think learnt to use it first, your kids. Now, if your kids were cheating on their homework in November 2022, they would have used an approach that computer scientists call a zero-shot prompt. In other words, they would have just said, ChatGPT, write me an essay on the causes of the American Civil Revolution. A few seconds later, homework complete. Of course, teachers and schools caught up to this pretty quickly, but today it's a little bit more difficult because we now have what's known as an agentic AI workflow. How's this different? Well, if your kids would use the same question on the latest version of ChatGPT, ChatGPT 01, or the latest version of Claude, they would use an agentic process. In other words, the AI would first start off by telling itself to create an outline of an ideal essay. It would then prompt itself to do some web research. It would create a first draft. It would review the first draft and look for areas of improvement. It would write a second draft and then analyze that. So by the time you're actually getting the finished result of the work done by AI, you'll realize that the computer has now spent more time thinking about the problem. This is the difference between answering something based on pre-trained knowledge and spending more time on inference. In other words, spending more time actually dissecting the problem, analyzing it from different angles, and reasoning. An AI agent is a system for taking action. It uses logic, computation, and different kinds of workflows to be more effective at not only answering the questions you ask, but even taking action in the real world. In other words, it's a combination of a large language model that understands our questions, it can respond to us in a very human way, and a large action model. And these actions could be booking a flight on Expedia, making a restaurant reservation, checking something in an enterprise HR system, anything you can imagine. But by connecting these two things together, as we move into 2025, you're going to start to see that AI agents are going to be central to the transformation of not just of our lives as ordinary consumers, but the way we work and use enterprise systems. So I see a number of big transformations coming. The first is the shift from products to platforms. In almost every industry and every company is going to start to see themselves more as a technology-enabled platform. And this is changing industries. I mean, take automotive. It's a classic example. A company like Tesla doesn't sell cars. They actually sell basically smartphones on wheels. What you see behind me is the Tesla autopilot chipset. I mean, this essentially is the heart of the car. If you look at Teslas being updated, there's a fleet of Teslas behind me, all being updated via Wi-Fi. The difference between an expensive Tesla and a cheap one isn't the paintwork or the seats, it's the code, or specifically the features that are locked or unlocked via software. The ability of Tesla to basically produce these computational platforms means that they can now not only upgrade their cars by changing the code, they can move into other segments entirely, like insurance. And Tesla Insurance doesn't work like a normal insurance company. They don't care about your past driving history. They create an AI safety score based on the data they collect from the car you're driving, what time of the day you drive, how fast you drive, how fast you take the corners. And they use it to basically estimate your level of risk in real time. So this is just laying the groundworks for a much bigger transformation that's changing automotive entirely. Because the next step beyond this is self-driving cars, or specifically robotaxis. Waymo, which spun out of Google, is already doing this now in San Francisco, and they're now moving into a number of other cities. In fact, there are about 12 cities across the world where today you can summon up a robot car and it will drive you without any humans involved whatsoever. Sometimes these things go wrong. You can see this car park in San Francisco where Waymos seem to have an unfortunate consequence of gathering, for reasons that no one completely understands, following each other and honking for hours on end. But we're going to get the kinks worked out. Because you have to think of robots, whether they're self-driving cars or vacuum cleaners or any other kind of humanoid robot, as really a kind of embodied form of AI. I was in South Korea recently and I was amazed because you see robots everywhere. They're picking up and delivering dishes. They're working backstage, chopping up things. They're in distribution centers, unloading boxes. The thing that's really changing with robotics in the last couple of years is not only we can use these generative AI models to communicate with them more effectively, we're able now to build these massive virtual environments to simulate the physics of the real world. In other words, these robots are training themselves before they're even released out into the wild. The second big shift is the shift from transactions to experiences. Consider these brands behind me. What do they all have in common? Well, arguably, they've all done a very good job of leveraging data, algorithms, automation, and critically, artificial intelligence to transform the underlying transaction. Take Uber. What did you pay for your last Uber ride? You probably have no idea. Now, it's not that you're not paying attention to the screen. You are. When you're standing on the side of the road, you're intently looking at one number, but it's not the price. It's how long before you can get in the car of a complete stranger. That's what's bothering you. Preferably a black van. That's the one you want. Think about how strange that is. But your behavior and your attitudes and your mindset have been carefully and calculatively modified over time through the use of these algorithmic design patterns. Spotify's the same. How much do you spend on music every month? Okay, maybe you know your monthly subscription cost, but you don't exactly buy music anymore. You certainly don't know your average per unit entertainment cost. In fact, you may not even consciously consume it. There's an algorithm that plays music for you when you choose it. The idea of the transaction has disappeared. And of course, Starbucks is the same. What do you spend on coffee? No one has any idea. Most of the time they're using the app. They're so busy customizing it and playing with the rewards and the different features. The one thing they're not doing is paying attention to the underlying transaction. And this is even happening in our digital behaviors. In the future, Google will not give you hundreds of search results. It'll basically probably use generative AI to give you an answer, to answer the question you're looking for. Or there'll be some kind of agent that will actually take action for you on your behalf and book you a flight ticket, find you the latest restaurant you're trying to get into, set up a meeting with someone you're trying to see. The transaction will be replaced. And it's kind of hard to imagine in the next 10 years that there'll be any kind of experience that you'll have in the real or the digital world that won't in some way be mediated by artificial intelligence. But the third big shift is the shift from apps to agents. There's this new app that's become quite popular with kids. It's called Snack. If you are using it, I would say probably stop. It's designed for Gen Z. It's a new dating app. And the twist is this. Rather than swiping left or right on people you would like to potentially go out with, you train an AI on the kinds of people you like. That AI then interviews those people on your behalf and then tells you whether or not you should bother. That's pretty clever. But I kind of think the latest version of this will be everyone has their own personal AIs. Those AIs go on dates and they tell you, maybe thousands of computer cycles later, whether or not you should even bother communicating in real life. We are moving into a world in which we will use AI agents to govern most of our interactions. And this is happening quickly. There's going to be a time when you're going to tell your kids or grandkids that you used to have to use a separate app to do everything. And you might as well have told them that you used to ride a horse to work. Because a lot of the traffic on the web is basically going to be your AI agents communicating with other agents rather than physically looking at websites. And this is going to be a big change. And it's not just in our personal lives this is going to happen. It's going to particularly happen in the enterprise world. A lot of SaaS architecture, a lot of enterprise software is going to change. Because whether it's a HR system or a CRM system or some giant financial or accounting system, whether it lives in the cloud or not doesn't matter. What matters is that these are basically vast databases. And rather than interacting with them using some kind of dashboard or a complicated interface, we will use them by talking to an AI agent. And we'll tell the agent what we're trying to get done or the question we're trying to answer. And that agent will then talk to other agents. It'll synchronize or orchestrate or coordinate, and it'll actually return us either the specific answer we're looking for or help us get something done. And this is more than just efficiency. This is the beginning of a very different world in which AI agents not just change the world and how we experience it, but they will fundamentally revolutionize industries and reset the rules of competition. Like I said, AI is going to be the great equalizer. All of our experiences will be mediated by AI data. This is a great time to move beyond fear and uncertainty, to really thinking about what it might take to embrace radical change. But don't worry, I've got some next actions for you to think about. The best place to start when you're thinking about the potential of AI is not to listen to me. I'm too old. In fact, most of us are, unfortunately. But the good news is that there are people in your life who are a little bit closer to the future. They're your youngest employees. Maybe they're even your kids. Like I said, they were cheating on homework long before any of us figured out what generative AI was. So what can you learn from them? Maybe invite them to run a workshop for you and ask them to explain how that they use AI, chatbots, AI agents, and how this might potentially inform your own roadmap of transformation. I also want to give you a mind grenade to think about. So think about this one. If you had the resources and mandates to reinvent your organization with technology and talent, what is one thing that you would do differently in 2025 that would have the biggest impact? The second question I want you to think about is how AI is going to change the way we work. Like I said, a lot of the big changes that happened 100 years ago were as a direct result of the pandemic of 1918. If you ask people today what the biggest changes from the pandemic of 2020 was, they would say remote work. And there's a great deal of truth to that. When we started using things like Zoom, we discovered that we didn't need to necessarily be in an office to get things done. But I think this was just the tip of the iceberg, because at the same time that we were discovering the power of remote work, we were also making massive investments in digital transformation, digital signatures, automation. And I think what actually happened in 2020 was that we unwittingly unleashed a new industrial revolution. In fact, a fifth industrial revolution. I know what you're thinking. How did we get to 5? It's kind of like those Fast and the Furious films. Somehow we managed to make 10 films about 1970s Dodge Chargers defying the laws of physics. I have no idea how that happened, but I can tell you how 5 revolutions happened. The first was steam, then we had electricity, then there was computation in the 1950s. The fourth industrial revolution is kind of a point of some debate, but let's say it was a kind of a mashup of the mobile internet, the Internet of Things, smartphones. This sort of all happened in the early 2000s. But like I said, 2020, in particular, the investments that were triggered by the pandemic, I think brought forward an industrial revolution that was probably not meant to happen for another 10 years. And that was a revolution powered by artificial intelligence. To understand the significance of this, you have to really say, well, what's this going to do to the valuation of businesses and to the workplace? Well, I think in the future, there's going to be a valuation gap. In the old days, you'd say there were tech companies and traditional companies. Tech companies had incredible valuations, multiples that were hard to understand. And they were really defined by their ability to get more operating leverage from their capital than normal companies did. But in the future, I think in every market, in every industry, in every category, there's going to be winners and losers. And the winners and losers are going to be determined by those, whether they're in agriculture or transportation or financial services or logistics, who found a way to leverage AI to transform the way they work. And this is going to be decisive. And to understand this, you've got to think about the previous industrial revolutions, say like electricity. I mean, if electricity had a kind of an invention moment, you could argue it was 1831 when the British physicist Michael Faraday invented the electric dynamo. But it took a long time before that made any substantial change to the way people got things done. In fact, it took almost 82 years before someone, Henry Ford, comes along and goes, okay, so this is the electricity idea. I know this is wild, but what if we don't just power factories differently? What if we design them differently too? And this was the beginning of his idea of the Highland Park facility, a factory that was not just powered by electricity, but was more decentralized, more distributed, that had different kinds of people doing different kinds of jobs. And if any of this sounds familiar, it's because I think we're once again at a similar moment in time where we have to ask ourselves, how do these new AI tools allow us to redefine not just the workplace, but the very nature of work itself? Future AI-powered organizations, I think, have to be different, not just better. And they have to be different in terms of things like scale and speed and sustainability. Let's think about some of these. I mean, scale is a controversial one. A lot of people have worried that future AI-powered organizations are not going to need as many people. In other words, we're going to lose a lot of jobs. And there's no doubt that the scale of some of these organizations will be different. But the more interesting way of looking at this is it possible that even smaller to medium organizations will be able to compete with the scale of what used to be very large global organizations by using these tools in new ways? There's already been this thought experiment where someone says, will we actually see someone create $1 billion company with only one person? And that's not, of course, just one person working by themselves. That's one person with potentially thousands or millions of AI agents to help them. It's not an inconceivable notion. And in fact, in many industries, in places that you would least expect, we've seen the rise of new kinds of lightweight, agile organizations that leverage the power of technology, remote work, communications, and AI in the cloud to do things that just weren't possible before. A couple of years ago, you might not have seen this, but Revlon went bankrupt. I mean, how did this happen? This was one of the giants in the 90s of the cosmetics industry. And it's because they were facing increasing pressure from new, upstart, independent beauty brands, which were making their founders billionaires. Of course, talking people like Kylie Jenner, or more recently, Selena Gomez, both of whom became billionaires on the back of beauty brands that had no traditional marketing, no traditional advertising, that outsourced a lot of their distribution, supply chain, e-commerce and manufacturing, and leveraged technology, algorithms and automation to build massively scaled businesses at a very small scale. The second big change is that of speed. How do we increase the internal clock speed of our operations and our workplaces using AI? I don't know if any of you are in sales, but if you are, you would know that a big part of any kind of salesperson's work is preparation, and specifically the kind of preparation which involves research, looking at websites, looking at your prospect, looking at their activity, the data, how they use your product. Relatively small amount of time is actually speaking to those prospects or building those human relationships. As we move into 2025, it's absolutely clear that that preparation work is exactly the kinds of things which AI agents are so prolific and proficient at doing. They can look at all your meetings, they can look at LinkedIn, they can summarize company reports, and they can give you a very short summary so that by the time you actually go into that meeting, you're completely prepared without having to spend all that time doing it for yourself. In other words, you're increasing the speed at which you can now achieve. But if you scale this up to organizations, we're also seeing organizations that run much faster than any of their previous competitors did. Don't know if you've heard of a company called Shein. If you've got teenage kids, you probably have heard of it. It's really a phenomenon. In the old days, a business like H&M and Zara, they would look at a trend in Milan or Paris. They would create a cheaper version of that item in, 6 to 8 weeks. Shein uses algorithms that look at what people are wearing on TikTok or social media. They can scrape a digital CAD file, send it to one of 6,000 contract manufacturers in Guangzhou, and they'll have something in the market in 6 to 8 days. Now, of course, that has its own complications, but just think about this. 7 years ago, Shein, which is now going for like a 60 or 70 billion IPO, is worth more than H&M and Zara combined. Not so long ago, they were just a wedding dress manufacturer in Guangdong. This shows you the power of AI-powered organizations to redefine themselves. The final characteristic, though, is that of sustainability. I don't know if you knew this, but for every 5 prompts you type into an engine like ChatGPT or Claude, it takes 1 bottle of water to cool the data center. And of course, it's not just water, it's power. The energy requirements of the next generation of AI are extraordinary. Extraordinary to the extent that they're now talking about bringing back nuclear power stations co-located with data centers just so that we can keep using these technologies. And this is a big subject, but what you want to realize is that in a way, we're all going to be technology companies in the future, which means where we get our power from is going to be critically important as thinking about net zero. So in order to do this, I think we have to realize that we can't just be a little bit better. We're going to have to create entirely new kinds of workplaces and systems of work. We have to be not just better, we have to be different kinds of businesses. So when you take all that together, I believe that AI is not just changing the workplace, it's transforming the system of work itself. Think about what Henry Ford did and how that applies to the work of today. Now is the time to reimagine our organizations by leveraging algorithms, automation, and AI for improvements in things like scale and speed and sustainability. As a next action, I'd like to offer you this little exercise. Get your team together and brainstorm which of your existing processes and workflows might be able to be upgraded with AI. Now, I want you to divide your solutions into 2 columns. In column 1, put things that maybe will get a 10% improvement. But the column you want to really pay attention is to the things that would lead to a 10x change in value, efficiency, or improvement. And ask yourself, what kind of new capabilities will your people need in order to really focus on the things that actually move the needle? Here's my second mind grenade for you to think about. What will AI-first native brands and enterprises really be like? And I want you to think beyond your immediate category. Think about retail, financial services, healthcare. And how will the insides of these companies change? Not just marketing and IT, which is an obvious place for AI, but things like supply chains and product development. What is it really going to take to create an AI-powered organization of the future? Now, the final question I want to look at today is this one. How is AI going to change our role as leaders? There's a lot of fear and uncertainty at the moment, and it's understandable. People see the power of these new AI tools and they ask themselves, are these things going to replace me? But a more interesting question, I think, is to ask yourself, given these changes and these new tools, what is it going to mean to be a good leader and a valuable employee in the future? I think humans and machines have always had a complicated relationship, and this is not a new debate. This has been going for thousands of years. Human beings, in fact, it's almost one of our defining characteristics, is our ability to create tools. And every time we create a tool, it in some way changes the world because it changes what is valuable activity. We don't blame hammers, for taking away the work that we used to do with our hands. A human with a hammer becomes an augmented new source of capabilities. We change, but those changes push the boundaries of what's possible just a little bit further every time they happen. So I think the real thing to imagine is not whether AI is going to destroy jobs, but how it's going to change them in the 21st century. I believe that the most effective leaders in the future will be those that combine a deep understanding of human complexity, how to motivate people, what's a great customer experience, with a flair for computational thinking. And what I mean by that is the ability to know how to leverage AI and technology to really change work for the better. So there's three pieces of advice that I would like to give you. The first is, when you do have the opportunity to automate, also elevate. Don't just get rid of people or try to, cover your ROI by cutting staff. Really ask yourself, how do I retrain the talent in my organization to be more useful in the context of these new tools? It's every time we get some kind of new tool, it changes the workplace. I mean, think about it. There used to be typing pools, giant rooms of people using typewriters, because that was a specialist skill. Not everyone knew how to do it. And then when we had computers, that became word processing pools. Eventually, we all learned how to use these things and they became democratized. And then suddenly, your proficiency in these tools became a hallmark of success. And the classic example for me, this is Excel. Any of you that has any kind of analysis role, I'm sure, is a master of Excel. It's probably even your Jedi mind trick. You're probably very proud of it. You do pivot tables and you're a master at hunting bugs and cell references. Then you meet a new intern who joined last year who doesn't care about Excel. They have discovered that they can upload an Excel spreadsheet into one of these new AI tools, and they can just ask the AI to do the analysis for them, whether that's creating graphs that impress the CEO and board, or it's actually even making recommendations about how to improve the variables. Now, is this person lazy? Possibly. But are they any less intelligent because they don't know the mastery of this tool that was popular 20 years ago? No. In fact, people that are good at Excel now use it as a co-pilot. They're actually working with AI as they're using the spreadsheet. It becomes a new tool for thinking in a different way. What I'm trying to say is that every time there's a new tool, it isn't an opportunity to ask ourselves, is this job disappearing? It's an opportunity to retrain people to use these things to think new ways and work in ways that weren't possible before. The second piece of advice I would say is don't work, design work. It's estimated that, something like 65% of all code today is not even written by people. It's written by machines or people working closely with machines. Now, does that mean we're writing less code? No. Companies like Google, I heard estimates they're writing 20 times more code than they ever wrote before. It's because people now are more productive. And you need different kinds of programmers now. Knowing the code is not as important as knowing what the business needs, or knowing the security risks, or how to think more abstractly about how connecting different systems together. In other words, the value is shifting. And the most valuable thing to realize is that this is kind of a form of metacognition, because the most valuable people in the organization are the ones thinking about the work itself rather than just doing it. You see the rise of ops teams now. So there's finance ops, marketing ops, DevOps, AI ops. The job of an ops team is not to do the work, it's to find a more productive way to allow the work to happen. And in a way, we all need to really embrace that mindset, which is not to focus on the things that we thought defined our job, but in a way to think about how we can destroy our own job so that we can create a better one. And that leads me to the third and final point, which is you need to find your alpha. And what I mean by that is the concept of alpha in terms of the financial markets. In financial markets, alpha is really the definition of outperformance. It's what you do that is better than what the rest of the market is doing naturally. And I think this applies to talent as well. A little while ago on my podcast, Between Worlds, where I interview different people that are pioneering the use of AI, I interviewed this very interesting architect known as Tim Fu. He's one of the world's leading parametric architects that uses generative AI to not just come up with ideas, but to create buildings. He used to work with Zaha Hadid, who was a very famous architect known for her organic forms. So I said to Tim, are you threatened by these new tools? And you can see behind me some of the visualizations he created with Sora. And he said no, because he says the role of an architect in the 21st century is not necessarily coming up with the generative design of the building, but bringing their specific human context. And what he meant by that was the years of experience, taste, of knowledge and aesthetics, by able to look at the generative results of the machine and know which is good and which is bad, and which is relevant and which is irrelevant, and which should have more time spent on it and which should be discarded. This is really the role of the human being as the orchestrator of tools and technologies, rather than someone that's doing the mechanical, repetitive work itself. And something to bear in mind is that, designing and monitoring AI agents in the near future is going to be as important as your ability to hire and manage people. AI agents aren't the future. I predict that this year you will not only be using AI agents, you will be designing and building them for yourself. They will be an extension of yourself, a kind of an embodied form of your own internal logic processes, which now live inside the enterprise, working continuously. In summary, the rise of AI, I believe, will change, not destroy work. Reskilling is the key to thriving in an automated world. Human leadership is going to be more important than ever, but we need to change our mindset and we need to constantly upgrade our own cognitive capabilities. As a next action, I would say look at ways you can transform your uncertainty about AI into an opportunity for you and your teams. What are some new tools and techniques and workflows that you can personally adopt in the next 12 months? How might you role model these to be the kind of change you would like to see elsewhere in your organization? Here's a final mind grenade for you to think about. 5 years from now, if you want to convince a bright young person to pass on their job at some hot new tech startup and join your company instead, what would be your most convincing argument? What would you need to change today to make that more likely to be true? So it's been a great pleasure talking to all of you. I'd love to stay in touch. Please follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or YouTube. If you'd like the slides from today with the key recommendations, I've put them for you all online. But what I want you to really remember is that the rise of AI isn't some technological trend. It is a true civilization scale event that's going to transform not just our industries and our careers, but the very fabric of the world itself. AI is the great equalizer. And because of that, this is going to be a period of not just unprecedented change, but one of extraordinary opportunity.